Do you ever hear one of those cases where the answer is sitting right in front of everyone's faces for years, decades even, and nobody sees it? And then when the truth finally comes out, it's not just shocking, it's unsettling because it's someone you were supposed to be able to trust. That's this case. The murder of Sherri Rasmussen isn't just a whodunit. It's a story about love, jealousy, missed chances, and a police department that may have been looking the other way for far too long. A staged crime scene, a love triangle no one wanted to talk about, a cold case file gathering dust for 23 years. And the killer? She was a cop the entire time. Hey friends, welcome back. I'm Meg, and here we mix the most fascinating, twisty, and sometimes downright infuriating true crime stories with relaxing gameplay, so you can sip your tea and gasp at the drama without feeling your heart rate go through the roof. If you're new here, we do deep dives. We don't just scratch the surface. We unpack the people, the places, the culture, the missed clues, and the weird coincidences that make a case stick in your brain for years. Grab a warm drink, maybe a snack, make yourself cozy. We are going deep today. And I mean deep into the life of Sherri, her whirlwind romance with her husband John, the shadow of an ex-girlfriend who just happened to be a Los Angeles police officer, and the investigation that was botched so badly it would take DNA, coffee cup trash, and some serious patience to finally bring the truth to light. Today, we're diving into a case with twists, turns, and the ultimate "are you kidding me" ending. And whilst we do that, I will be out here playing Garden Simulator, turning a neglected patch of dirt into something beautiful. We're talking overgrown weeds, busted fences, random junk, basically the gardening equivalent of this investigation. I like to play games while unpacking a mystery. It keeps me busy and keeps you visually stimulated while we dig into the details. So, grab a snack, get comfy, and let's clear out the weeds, both in the yard and in these freaking disastrous case files. So I did just make a small start before I pressed record, just to get a feel of how the game is. So that's why I have all these tools already. So, before we talk about the people involved, it's worth stepping back into Los Angeles in the mid-1980s. Crime rates in the city were high. Violent crime had been climbing since the late 1970s. Aw, kitty! Hello! Meow, 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 meow. LAPD was in the middle of what many saw as its boys' club era. Overwhelmingly male, militaristic in culture, and fiercely protective of its own. There was a lot of pride in the department, but also a tendency to circle the wagons where one of their own was under suspicion. Technology-wise, police work looked very different. DNA testing, it existed. It wasn't widely used in criminal cases until the late 1980s and early 90s. And even then, it was slow and expensive. Most cases in 1986 were built on eyewitnesses, eyewitness statements, fingerprints, and ballistics. Surveillance cameras weren't on every corner, and digital databases were still in their infancy. In this world, police officers weren't just public servants. They were seen by many as unshakable authority figures. If an officer said they didn't do something, most people believed them. And if that officer was well-liked, respected, and had years of service, that kind of trust was almost automatic. That is the world that Sherri Rasmussen was living in when she crossed paths with John Rutten, and by extension, Stephanie Lazarus. Now I'm going to get into Sherri as a person, kind of introduce who she was. So Sherri Rasmussen was born on February 7th, 1957, the middle daughter of Nels and Loretta Rasmussen. She grew up in LA County, in a warm but hard-working family that valued education, kindness, and doing the right thing. From a young age, Sherri stood out, not just for being bright, but for being motivated. She was the type of kid who couldn't just do enough to get by. She wanted to excel. She skipped her senior year of high school entirely, starting college early, a decision most teenagers wouldn't even consider. But Sherri was laser focused. By the time she was in her 20s, she wasn't just another nurse. She was the nurse that you wanted in charge. She earned her master's degree in nursing and climbed the ranks quickly. By 29, she was already the director of nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center, a leadership role that usually went to people in their 40s or 50s after decades of experience. Her colleagues described her as calm under pressure, the kind of person who could handle a chaotic emergency room and still take the time to reassure a worried patient's family. She had approachable warmth, but she was no pushover. When tough calls had to be made, Sherri made them. Outside of work, Sherri had a strong moral compass and a big heart. Friends remembered her as fun to be around, someone who loved to laugh, but who would also stand up for people if she thought they were being treated unfairly. She was independent, but still close to her family. By 1984, Sherri had established a solid career, a circle of friends, and a comfortable life in Los Angeles. She wasn't looking for someone to complete her, but that was the year she met a man who would change the course of her life. John Rutten wasn't just some random guy Sherri happened to meet. He had his own impressive story. Born and raised in California, John was smart, athletic, and social. In high school, he was a standout athlete, but volleyball became his passion. When he attended UCLA in the late 1970s, he became a star on the men's volleyball team. Teammates described him as competitive but friendly, someone who was comfortable in both social and athletic circles. He wasn't the loudest guy in the room, but he did have this kind of natural charisma. John majored in mechanical engineering, and by the time he graduated, he had offers from reputable companies. He eventually landed a career as an engineer in the aerospace industry, a stable, well-paying job in a field that was booming in the 80s. In college, John dated casually, but one of his more significant relationships was with a fellow student athlete, a political science major named Stephanie Lazarus. They were both young, ambitious, and competitive, and their romance had a fun, physical, and athletic edge. By the time John met Sherri in... I just mowed an eggplant. Okay. By the time John met Sherri in 1984, his relationship with Stephanie was long over, though they'd remained friendly. Meeting Sherri was different. Their connection was instant. Friends later recalled that it wasn't a whirlwind fling, so much as two people quickly realizing they were highly compatible. They started dating seriously, and John found himself drawn to Sherri's intelligence and confidence. She was someone who had her own career, her own identity, a partner, not just a girlfriend. Oh, excuse me, kitty. In November of 1985, after about a year together, John and Sherri got married. They moved into a condo in Van Nuys, California, and began settling into a newlywed life. By all accounts, things were good, but not everyone was happy for them. Stephanie Eileen Lazarus was born in oh my god, this cat, I swear to god, was born in 1960 and grew up in Southern California. She was bright, athletic, and ambitious. The kind of student who didn't just join activities, she threw herself into them. In high school, she played sports and was active in student government. She was competitive in a way that wasn't always about being the best academically. She liked to win in every area of life, whether it was sports, grades, or social situations. She wanted to come out on top, always. By the late 1970s, she was at UCLA, majoring in political science. That is where she met John Rutten. Both were athletes, John on the men's volleyball team, Stephanie on the women's team. They started dating, and the relationship was easy in some ways. They had shared friends, shared routines, and a shared love of sports. By the time they graduated, the romantic part of their relationship has fizzled. But they stayed friendly, and according to John's later testimony, sometimes more than friendly. He even admitted that after he began dating Sherri Rasmussen, he and Stephanie had been intimate at least once. Like, get a load of this guy. He did call it a mistake, but it's a detail that the prosecution would later use to suggest the lingering feelings on Stephanie's side. After UCLA, Stephanie didn't go the political science route. She joined the Los Angeles Police Department in 1981, a time when women made up a small percentage of the force. She thrived in the LAPD's physical training and quickly adapted to the culture. Co-workers described her as capable and confident, but also as someone who liked to be in control, on and off the job. The LAPD in the early 80s was still very much an old-school, tight-knit environment. Female officers often had to provide themselves in ways their male counterparts didn't, and Stephanie seemed eager to do that. She played on the department's sports teams, stayed physically fit, and built a solid reputation. And Stephanie seemed eager to do that. She played on the department's sports teams, stayed physically fit, and built a solid reputation. By the time John and Sherri were married in late 1985, Stephanie had been a police officer for about 4 years. On paper, her life was on track. A respected career, good friends, and an active lifestyle. But as we'll see, her connection to John wasn't entirely in the past. On paper, John and Sherri had every reason to be living in a honeymoon haze in late 1985 and early 1986. They were both thriving in their careers, newly married, and setting up their home in Van Nuys. But just because you're ready to start fresh doesn't always mean that everyone else is. Stephanie Lazarus had been part of John's life for years, long before Sherri ever came into the picture. And while John may have considered their romance ancient history, Stephanie's actions suggested she wasn't quite ready to close that chapter. They still moved in some of the same social circles, especially through athletic friends from UCLA. This meant that Stephanie occasionally saw John still, and according to trial testimony, those encounters weren't strictly platonic in the years before his marriage. Even if nothing happened after the wedding, the history was there, and it wasn't the kind that you can easily forget. The most telling sign of trouble came when Stephanie showed up at at Sherri's workplace, Glendale Adventist Medical Center. Unannounced, Sherri was in a leadership role, busy managing staff when Stephanie arrived. Like, what the heck, right? According to Nels Rasmussen's testimony years later, Stephanie told Sherri she had been in a relationship with John and implied they had been intimate, even after John and Sherri had started dating. The exact wording is debated. There's no verbatim record, but the point was clear. Stephanie wanted Sherri to know that she had been there first. Sherri came home and told her parents about the encounter. She didn't necessarily accuse Stephanie of being dangerous, but she didn't like the intrusion, and that's fair enough. For someone to come to your job and basically warn you about your own husband, it's unsettling at best and hostile at worst. Her father, Nels, took it seriously enough to remember it in detail decades later when asked on the witness stand. It was a red flag, but one that no one in law enforcement acted on at the time. The tension between John Rutten, Sherri Rasmussen, and Stephanie Lazarus wasn't just a passing awkward phase. It was a slow build of mixed signals, bad decisions, and moments that, in hindsight, look like red flags flapping in the wind. So we know that John and Stephanie had dated casually in their UCLA days, and though the romance ended, the friendship lingered. By the time John met Sherri, he was moving on, but Stephanie clearly wasn't ready to let go. Sometime during John and Sherri's courtship, and before they got married, Stephanie came to him, upset, emotional, and looking for what she described as closure. John, by his own later testimony, admitted that he felt bad for her. She was someone he had once cared about, and in the moment he thought that giving her what she wanted, one last intimate encounter, might help her move on. It was not his smartest decision. He said it was a one-time thing, no rekindled romance, no ongoing fling, just a mistake made because he didn't want to hurt her further. But the truth is, sleeping with someone rarely gives them closure. In Stephanie's case, it may have done the opposite, feeding the idea that there was still something between them. If you haven't noticed already, I'm kind of skipping through the days because I don't have much patience. Anyhow, so fast forward, John is engaged to Sherri, life should be moving forward. So I'm going to circle back to the hospital encounter, as this is what occurs after John decides to give Stephanie one last night for closure. So we know that while Sherri was at work at the Glendale Adventist Medical Center, Stephanie shows up in her LAPD uniform, I think. I read some things said that she was in her LAPD uniform. I also read somewhere that it was a day off thing, so it may have been on a day off, I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, she drops by knowing that Sherri would be there, and according to Sherri's family and later testimony, Stephanie told Sherri something along the lines of, "If I can't have John, no one will." She also made sure to inform Sherri, again in that pointed way, that she and John had slept together recently. Sherri, blindsided, went home and she did confront John about this. This was when John did actually confess to the closure incident with Stephanie. And here's the part that speaks to Sherri's character. She forgave him. She believed that it was a one-off mistake and chose to move forward with their relationship. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. and it certainly didn't erase the unease Stephanie's presence brought into their lives. One of the most fascinating and telling aspects of the Sherri Rasmussen case isn't something pulled from a crime scene or found in a cold case. It's in the ink on paper. Letters exchanged between Stephanie Lazarus and John Rutten's mother. You heard that right. John's mum sent a letter to Stephanie. By mid-1985, everyone in John's life seemed to understand that Stephanie wasn't just an old college fling. She was still deeply attached. And John's mother, worried about the impact on his engagement to Sherri, decided to address it head on. John's mother sent Stephanie a direct, polite, but firm letter. The core message was simple. John is engaged to Sherri now, and it's time to give them space to build their life together. She made it clear she wanted no more lingering friendship that might blur the lines. It wasn't hostile, but it was a warning. Stephanie actually wrote back on August 4th of 1985, and while the letter had the trappings of politeness, it also contained a raw, emotional bombshell. I'm still in love with John, and this past year has really torn me up. That one sentence stripped away any doubt about where she stood emotionally. It wasn't over for her, not even close. She wasn't just fond of John, she was in love with him. And she was telling his mother that outright. Like, the audacity of this woman. The rest of her reply attempted to soften the impact, saying she wished John well, that she had moved on with her life and was focusing on her career. But that confession line told a much more honest story. Years later, prosecutors would highlight these letters to show that Stephanie's attachment to John wasn't a vague, passing crush from their college days. This was fresh, active emotion, confessed in writing, just months before Sherri's murder. And think about the dynamic here. This wasn't Stephanie telling John directly, where feelings could be brushed off as harmless nostalgia. She was telling his mother. It's the kind of confession that, intentionally or not, plants a seed of discomfort in the family. For Sherri's side of the story, it meant one thing. Even before they said I do, there was someone out there openly in love with her fiancé, and not afraid to admit it. Oh. Hooray! Alright. It was a Monday morning in Van Nuys, California. The weather was typical for late February in Los Angeles. Mild, sunny, with that cool edge in the morning air before the day warmed up. Inside the Rasmussen-Rutten condo, the start of the week was quieter than usual. Sherri had planned to go to work that day, but she wasn't really feeling well. Her back was bothering her, and she decided to stay home. John, on the other hand, was up early. He got dressed for work and left around 7:30 a.m., heading to his engineering job at Micropolis, a computer storage company in Chatsworth. By all accounts, that was the last time that John saw his wife alive. What happened next would never be witnessed directly, but the crime scene and physical evidence would later tell a story. Sometime during the late morning or early afternoon, someone entered the condo. The sliding glass door in the living room had been shattered from the outside. Pieces of glass were scattered across the carpet. Inside, the place looked like it had been partially ransacked, but only partially. A large television set was pulled away from the wall, cords still attached. As if someone had started to unplug it, but stopped mid-task. And then there was Sherri. She was found lying on her back in the living room. She had been brutally beaten. Her face and head showed multiple injuries consistent with a struggle. There was a ligature mark on her wrist, suggesting she'd been tied or restrained at some point. On her left forearm was a deep, obvious bite mark. The killer had also shot her 3 times at close range with a .38 caliber revolver. 2 shots to the chest, 1 to the face. She had defensive wounds on her arms and hands, showing she had fought back hard. Her BMW was gone from the condo's garage. Later that evening, it would be found abandoned on a street not far away. There were no signs it had been stripped or prepared for resale, which made the car theft angle suspicious from the start. The immediate picture was confusing. On one hand, it looked like a burglary. Broken door, electronics moved, car missing. On the other hand, valuables like cash, jewelry, and credit cards were still in plain sight. And the level of violence didn't match a typical burglary, where intruders flee when confronted. This seemed personal. And there was another detail that would later come back to haunt investigators. The murder weapon was a .38 caliber revolver, the exact type issued to LAPD officers at the time. Even more eyebrow-raising, not long after Sherri's murder, Stephanie Lazarus filed a report with her department saying her backup .38 caliber revolver had gone missing. The timing was, let's just say, suspicious. Investigators couldn't prove it was the same gun used in the murder, but decades later, this fact would be a major talking point at the trial. Sherri Rasmussen was killed in February 1986. Police chalked it up to a botched burglary, stuck the file in the "we'll totally get back to it" pile, and surprise, surprise, they never got back to it. Stephanie Lazarus, who, by the way, wasn't just some random acquaintance, but an ex-girlfriend of Sherri's husband, wasn't even really looked at. Life, at least on paper, moved forward. But behind the scenes, oh honey, those emotional ties hadn't gone anywhere. So here's where things go from, that's interesting, to, wait, what? So in the months after Sherri's death, John stayed in touch with Stephanie. And at some point, this is from John's own testimony, they slept together again. The audacity of this man! Now, John swears this wasn't some romantic reunion. He called it a moment of weakness. Which, okay, fine. Grief does weird things to people. His wife had just been murdered. Stephanie was familiar, and maybe it felt like comfort at the time. I'm just trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. But let's be real here. This is the second time he's hooked up with Stephanie while in a serious relationship situation involving Sherri. The first time was closure. Spoiler, closure is not what happens when you get naked with your ex. And now it's post-murder. Like, what are the odds? From a human perspective, sure, maybe he was lonely. But from a true crime perspective, this is the kind of detail that makes you tilt your head. Like, sir, you're not helping your case here. And in hindsight, it gave prosecutors a perfect little nugget to say, maybe this is why John didn't push harder for cops to look into her back then. Not longer after this post-murder rendezvous, Stephanie seemed to hit the life reboot button. I just realized I was watering plants that were already watered. Ignore that. She married another LAPD officer. Quick wedding, quick marriage, quick divorce. It lasted only a few years. After that, she poured herself into her career. Climbed the ranks, became a respected detective, did fancy cases in the art theft detail, the kind of stuff that makes you sound cool at parties. On paper, she looked like she'd moved on, built a life, done the whole new chapter thing. In reality, her name stayed tucked away in the Rasmussen file, like a bad secret nobody wanted to talk about, for over 20 years. When detectives processed the crime scene, the shell casings, or rather the lack of them, told them a lot right away. The murder weapon had been a .38 caliber revolver. Revolvers don't eject spent casings like semi-automatic pistols do, so there was nothing for crime scene techs to collect. That meant that ballistics comparison was limited. No matching casings to trace to other crimes. A .38 caliber revolver in 1986 wasn't unusual. They were a common choice for both civilians and law enforcement. But here's where eyebrows should have been raised. At the time, LAPD officers were issued .38 caliber revolvers as their standard sidearm, and many also owned backup weapons of the same caliber. Not long after Sherri's murder, we're talking like within weeks, Officer Stephanie Lazarus filed a report stating that her own backup .38 caliber duty revolver had gone missing. Oh my god, this cat, I swear to god, had gone missing. She claimed that she couldn't locate it, and implications were that it might have been stolen. Now, to be clear, this is circumstantial. There's no physical proof tying Lazarus's missing a gun to the murder weapon, but it's the timing that stands out. What are the odds that a police officer, who also so happened to be the ex-girlfriend of the victim's husband, would lose a firearm of the exact make and caliber used in the murder right after the murder happened? At this time, this detail didn't set off the alarm bells that it should have. It was logged, but it wasn't investigated deeply in connection with Sherri's case. And in hindsight, that is absolutely baffling. Because here's the thing. In 1986, a missing firearm from an LAPD officer wasn't treated with the same urgency we'd expect today. Yes, it was noted, but it didn't necessarily trigger a major internal investigation unless there was proof it had been used in a crime. When the case finally went to trial in 2012, prosecutors used this detail to paint a picture. They didn't argue it was definitive proof, but they did say it was one of many puzzle pieces pointing towards Lazarus, combined with motive, opportunity, and other evidence. It started to look less like a coincidence and more like a smoking gun, minus the gun itself. From the very beginning, LAPD investigators leaned heavily on a single theory, that Sherri Rasmussen had interrupted a burglary in progress, and the intruders killed her in a panic. At first glance, the scene did seem to fit that idea. The sliding glass door was shattered, a TV had been moved, almost like someone was about to carry it out. Sherri's BMW was missing from the garage. To detectives in 1986, these were classic burglary markers. The working assumption was that she had been homesick, surprised the burglars, and was attacked in the heat of the moment. The police even had possible suspects in mind. 2 men who had been involved in a series of burglaries in that area. But here's the problem. These men were linked to smash and grab thefts, not violent murders. Their MO was to avoid confrontation, and when they did get violent, it wasn't this up close and personal. Sherri's murder was messy. She had been beaten severely before being shot. There was a bite mark on her arm, a strange and highly personal act for a random burglar. and most notably, items of real value, jewelry, cash, credit cards, were left untouched. The BMW was found abandoned a short distance from the condo, parked neatly on a residential street. It wasn't stripped for parts, it wasn't hidden in a chop shop. It looked as if someone had ditched it just far away enough to complicate the timeline. There was also the matter of the shattered door. Years later, crime scene experts would say it looked staged. The glass was scattered inside in a way that didn't match a forced entry while the door was locked. In fact, it looked more like the glass had been broken after the killer was already inside, to make it look like a break-in. But back in 1986, those doubts were either ignored or overshadowed by the burglary theory. Even the fact that the murder weapon matched the standard LAPD issue revolver didn't shift suspicious towards anyone in law enforcement. And here's a key thing. When Sherri's father, Nels Rasmussen, suggested early on that the police look at Stephanie Lazarus because of the workplace confrontation and her history with John, detectives reportedly brushed it off. In later interviews, Nels said that they told him something along the lines of, "Oh, she's a cop. We'd know if she was involved." That assumption would cost the case 23 years. When you look back at the 1986 investigation with modern eyes, the problems practically scream at you. But at the time, the case file reads like an example of tunnel vision. The LAPD seemed firmly committed to the burglary gone wrong narrative from day one. And that meant anything that didn't fit it was either downplayed or left unpursued. One of the most significant pieces of evidence from the scene was the deep bite mark left on Sherri's left forearm. Biting is not a common act in a random burglary. It's intimate and aggressive, and often indicates rage. It's the kind of injury that can sometimes be linked directly to a suspect through dental impressions. Crime scene techs did take a swab from the bite mark, but in 1986, DNA technology wasn't advanced enough to test it. The swab was labeled and stored, and then essentially forgotten about for over 2 decades. Stephanie's report about her missing .38 caliber revolver, it wasn't even connected to the murder file. There's no evidence it was even considered relevant by the original investigators. Sherri's father, Nels, was vocal from the start. He told police about Stephanie's visit to Sherri's workplace, about the tension between her and John, and about his gut feeling that this was personal. His concerns went into the file, and then nothing came from them. According to Nels, one detective essentially told him that if an officer had done it, they'd have already figured it out. Yeah. Okay, buddy. There's evidence that neighbors heard a loud struggle on the day of the murder. One even thought it sounded like a woman shouting for help. But these leads weren't followed up thoroughly, possibly because they didn't line up neatly with the burglary theory. Here's where bias comes in. The 1980s, the LAPD was notorious for its blue wall of silence, an unspoken rule that you didn't turn on your own. If an officer was suspected of misconduct, internal affairs might investigate quietly, but homicide, the bar for suspicion was sky high. You needed undeniable proof before anyone would even consider pointing the finger at another cop. Combine that with the fact that Lazarus was well-liked, athletic, and had no disciplinary record, and you start to see why the case drifted into cold storage without her name on the suspect list. The result? A box of evidence, including that bite mark swab, sat in a storage facility for decades, while the official story remained. Sherri Rasmussen had died in a tragic burglary gone wrong. While the Rasmussen family was mourning and trying to make sense of the loss, Stephanie Lazarus's life didn't skip a beat. In fact, it thrived. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Stephanie's career at the LAPD was on a steady upwards climb. She worked patrol, then moved into specialized units. She even became an instructor of the police academy, training new recruits. One of her proudest achievements? Helping to run the LAPD's DARE program, or DARE program. The school-based initiative aimed at teaching kids to just say no to drugs. Yes, the same woman who had brutally murdered another human being was standing in classrooms as a role model for children. To the casual observer, there was nothing remotely suspicious about her life. Meanwhile, Sherri's parents were still quietly pushing for the case to be reopened, but they were hitting walls. The official line from LAPD remained the same. There was no viable leads and the case was cold. By the early 2000s, forensic technology had made huge leaps. What had once been useless evidence, swabs, hair strands, microscopic traces, could now yield full DNA profiles. In 2004, a small team in the LAPD's cold case unit started reviewing unsolved homicides from the 1980s. Sherri Rasmussen's file landed on a detective's desk. Yay! Inside that dusty box of evidence was something almost no one had thought about in years. The swab taken from the bite mark on Sherri's arm. In 1986, this was essentially a just-in-case collection. There was no way to analyze it back then. But in 2004, DNA analysis could turn that swab into a suspect's genetic fingerprints. When they sent the sample to the lab, the results were immediate game changers. The DNA from the bite mark didn't belong to a man, it belonged to a woman. This single fact blew apart the burglary theory that had dominated the case for nearly 2 decades. If you're picturing a male burglar smashing his way in, that image no longer works. Statistically, home invasion burglaries are overwhelmingly male. This new evidence suggested something else entirely, a personal, targeted attack. So detectives went back to the original file with fresh eyes, looking for women who might have had motive. It didn't take long for Stephanie Lazarus's name to pop up, right there in the original notes in Nels Rasmussen's statements. She wasn't just an acquaintance. She was the jealous ex-girlfriend who had confronted Sherri at her job, who had access to a .38 revolver, and who was trained in how to stage a crime scene. The detectives knew this was sensitive. Accusing a fellow officer, especially one with decades on the force, was no small thing. They couldn't just walk up to her and ask her for a DNA swab. If she caught wind of the investigation, she could destroy evidence, craft an alibi, or use her connections to shut things down. They needed a way to get her DNA without her knowing, and that's where one of the most low-tech but brilliant police moves comes in. The coffee cup sting. By 2009, the cold case team was convinced they needed Stephanie Lazarus's DNA to either confirm or eliminate her as the source of the bite mark on Sherri Rasmussen's arm. But there was no way they could just ask for it without tipping her off. Lazarus was still a respected veteran officer, now working in the LAPD's art theft detail, a prestigious assignment that handled million-dollar paintings and high-profile cultural property cases. She had a good reputation, a nice office, and decades of experience in law enforcement. If she sensed she was under investigation, she would know exactly how to protect herself. So the detectives went old school, surveillance. They followed her discreetly, waiting for an open opportunity to collect something she had touched. something that could carry her DNA. And eventually, the perfect opportunity presented itself. Stephanie went out in public. Accounts vary on whether it was a lunch break or a casual outing, but she had a drink. After she was done, she tossed the disposable cup into a public trash can. That was all the detectives needed. They retrieved it, sent it to the lab, and waited. When the results came back, they were definitive. The DNA from the discarded coffee cup matched the DNA from the bite mark on Sherri Rasmussen's arm. Now, after 23 years, investigators finally had hard, scientific evidence linking Stephanie Lazarus to the crime scene. Now, the challenge was to arrest her without causing a departmental breakdown. Because this wasn't just any suspect, this was one of their own, and she still carried a badge and a gun. If she suspected that they were coming for her, things could get dangerous. Fast. So detectives came up with a plan that felt like something out of a sting operation. They decided to lure Lazarus into a controlled environment inside of police headquarters, where she wouldn't be armed. The ruse? They told her that they needed her help investigating a suspect in a stolen art case. Perfectly plausible given her position in the art theft unit. They asked her to come down to an interview room in the building's secure basement level. This was perfect because you have to give up your weapons to go into the interrogation rooms, so it was the perfect situation. When Stephanie arrived, she walked in casually, thinking she was doing her job. She sat down in the interview room, and two detectives, not her usual colleagues, began asking her about her history with John Rutten and whether she knew Sherri Rasmussen. And here's where it gets so fascinating to watch. She starts off relaxed, even friendly, but as soon as they mention Sherri's name, you can see it, the shift. Her posture changes. She starts drinking water, like she's auditioning for a hydration commercial. Her answers get more rambly. Lots of, I don't remember, and that was so long ago. She tries to play it off like her connection to John back then was no big deal, but every follow-up question digs a little deeper into her version of events. What makes it so captivating is knowing that the detectives already have her DNA match in their back pocket. They're just letting her talk, giving her room to lock herself into a story they can later dismantle in court.
I don't want to talk about this in the squadron because I don't know who people are listening. And if we go to my side, everybody's always wondering what everybody else is doing.
No problem.
Okay, we've been assigned a case that we've been looking at. Okay, it's a new case, and reviewing the case, there's some notes to see as far as your name being mentioned.
Okay.
Do you know John Rutten?
John Rutten?
Rutten.
Oh yeah, I went to school with him.
You did?
Yeah.
Were you guys friends, close friends?
Yeah, we're very close friends.
Yeah? You guys lived in the same dorm?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Dykstra.
Okay. Were you guys just friends or anything else, or?
Yeah, we were good friends.
Yeah. Was there ever any relationship or anything that developed between you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we dated, you know, I mean, what's this all about?
Well, it's relating to his wife.
Okay.
Okay. Did you know her?
Not really. I mean, I knew that he got married years ago.
Did you ever meet her?
God, I don't know. You know, God, that's been a million years ago. I mean...
Had you ever met his wife?
I may have.
Do you remember her name or anything, or? Or what she did for a living, or where she worked, or anything about her?
I'm going to say that I think she was a nurse. Man, I can't even remember how he said he met her. Yeah, I mean, it's been so long ago. I don't understand why you're talking about some guy I dated a million years ago.
Well, do you know what happened to his wife?
Yeah, I know she got killed.
Were you on the job back then, when that happened?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm sure I was on the job.
Did you ever visit him and his wife?
No.
No? Never went out to, get-together, dinners, anything of that nature?
No.
After his wife died, did you talk to him again, or or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I did talk to him.
And you're right.
I mean, if you guys are claiming that I'm a suspect, then, you know, I got a problem with, you know, with that.
Okay.
Okay? So, you know, if you're doing this as an interrogation, you're saying, hey, I'm a suspect. Well, now I got a problem with, you know, now you're accusing me of this? Is that what you're saying? And now you're telling me that somebody's saying that we had this big old fight, and I don't even know what you're talking about, you know, and I don't want to, you know, get in trouble for something that I didn't even do, or you're saying I did something.
Now, what we'd like to do is, obviously you know about all the DNA stuff and things of the nature that, you know, gets done on cases nowadays. You know, if we asked you for a DNA swab, would you be willing to give us one?
Maybe. Because now
because
now I'm thinking I probably need to talk to a lawyer.
Okay.
I mean,
well,
because I know how this stuff works. Okay, don't get me wrong. You're right. I have been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
And I wish I had been recording this because now it sounds like, you know, there's, you know, you're telling these people saying I'm fighting with her, and now it sounds like you're trying to, you know.
These people are pointing at you for whatever reason.
I don't know why. That's just crazy. I mean, that's absolutely crazy.
And it would be irresponsible on our part not to look at it.
I know. You guys have to do your job, and I guess I'm going to have to contact somebody.
You know you have the right to remain silent. Do you understand?
Yes.
Anything you say may be used against you in court. Do you understand?
Yes.
You have the right to the presence of an attorney before and during any questioning. Do you understand?
Yes.
If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you free of charge before any questioning if you want. Do you understand?
Yes.
Do you want to talk to us right now?
No.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
This is crazy.
Okay.
This is I'm like in shock. I'm totally in shock.
Watching that back, you can see how much she's trying to stay composed, but the cracks start showing. She avoids certain details, changes topics, and keeps circling back to how busy she was back then, almost like she's hoping they'll forget to press her. The detectives aren't biting. They're patient, polite, and letting her dig the hole herself. And the best part? She has no idea that as soon as she walks out of that room, she's walking straight into handcuffs. Stephanie Lazarus's trial began in early 2012 in Los Angeles County Superior Court, nearly 26 years after Sherri Rasmussen's murder. From day one, prosecutors made it clear this was not just about solving an old homicide. It was about exposing how a personal grudge had turned deadly, and how the killer had managed to hide in plain sight for decades. Deputy District Attorney Shannon Presby opened by telling the jury that this was a story of jealousy, rage, and betrayal. He laid out the core narrative. Stephanie Lazarus was a trained police officer, armed and dangerous. She was still emotionally tied to John Rutten. She had confronted Sherri at work, making it clear she had once been intimate with John. And when she couldn't have him, she decided no one else would either. Prosecutors presented the DNA evidence from the bite mark as their smoking gun. The science was irrefutable. Lazarus's genetic profile matched the swab taken from Sherri's arm. They also brought in ballistics experts to talk about the .38 caliber revolver. While they couldn't prove it was the gun, the coincidence was hard to ignore. Then came the testimony from Sherri's father, Nels, who told the jury about the workplace confrontation with Stephanie and how he had urged detectives to look at her back in 1986. Stephanie Lazarus's defense team went on the offensive. They argued that the investigation was deeply flawed, with mishandled evidence and lost opportunities. They suggested that the DNA evidence, while real, could have been contaminated or transferred accidentally. They also attacked the credibility of the LAPD's handling of the case, implying that the cold case detectives had tunnel vision once they saw Lazarus's name connected to John Rutten. And when it came to motive, the defense painted Lazarus as someone who had moved on long before the murder. Yes, she had dated John years earlier, but They claimed there was no evidence she was obsessed or jealous to the point of killing. One of the most emotionally charged moments came when John himself took the stand. He admitted under oath that he had slept with Stephanie once after he'd started dating Sherri, calling it a mistake. He denied that there was any ongoing romantic connection between him and Stephanie in 1986, but acknowledged that she might have had lingering feelings. In the end, it was the combination of the DNA match, the missing gun, the staged burglary, and the personal motive that convinced the jury the bite mark alone, a deeply personal, violent act, made it clear that this was not random. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 2 days. On March 8, 2012, the jury returned to the courtroom. Stephanie Lazarus sat at the defense table. Her expression is guarded. The foreperson stood and read the verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder in the killing of Sherri Rasmussen. This wasn't a case of reasonable doubt lingering in the air. The jury was decisive. Sherri's family officially had acknowledgement of what they had suspected for over 2 decades, that the woman responsible for Sherri's death had been a police officer all along. In May 2012, Lazarus returned to court for sentencing. Stephanie Lazarus was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving the minimum term. She was transferred to the California Institution for Women in Chino, where she remains to this day. Justice had finally been served. Since her conviction, Lazarus has maintained her innocence. She has appealed multiple times, arguing that evidence was mishandled and her rights were violated. So far, all appeals have been denied. The murder of Sherri Rasmussen is one of those cases that sticks with you, not just because of the brutality of the crime, but because of what it says about trust, bias, and the blind spots of law enforcement. Here's a woman, Stephanie Lazarus, who wore a badge, took an oath, and built a career on the image of protecting others. She taught kids in the DARE program. She trained new recruits on integrity. She was, on paper, the exact kind of person you're supposed to be able to trust. And yet, behind closed doors, she harbored a grudge so deep it ended in cold-blooded murder. What did you think, kitty? Pe, 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 pe. Oh, you're so cute. Okay, friends, that is the wild, frustrating, and absolutely jaw-dropping case of Sherri Rasmussen. We had jealousy, a staged crime scene, DNA that sat in storage for over 2 decades, and a killer who was literally walking the halls of the LAPD while the case file gathered dust. If you liked hanging out and going through this roller coaster with me, you know the drill. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next case that we dig into. Get it? That was digging. Garden Simulator. Yeah. Cool. Also, I'd love to hear what you think. Do you believe Stephanie planned this for weeks, or was it an impulsive act of rage? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I love reading theories, and honestly, sometimes you might catch something that even I didn't catch. As always, my resources will be linked in the description. And hey, if you want to keep the conversation going, you can follow me on TikTok, Instagram, or join my Discord. The links are all in the description as well. We have a cozy little community over there where we talk true crime, gaming, and all the weird little mysteries that keep us up at night. Okay, well, until next time, stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the people you think you can trust the most are the ones you should watch the closest. Bye!